Oh, hi, everybody. My name is Matt Storrs, and welcome to Mattsplaining. On today's episode, I have an expert on who I'm extremely excited to speak with. Expert, please introduce yourself and tell us what you're an expert in.
Hi, I am Lola Jean. I am a sex educator, an occasional pro dom, a fetish wrestler, and the world record holder for volume squirting. And I am an expert on all things sex and BDSM.
Fantastic. My understanding of sex, BDSM, all kind of relates to the media of my childhood and watching Xena and being like, oh, it seems really weird that Ares is really obsessed with Xena, this warrior princess, and how like aggressive she is and like how passionate she is, how she has this relationship with Gabrielle. But ultimately, Ares is presented as like this really masculine figure, but he is constantly doing everything he can to get Xena's attention, to get Xena to attack him and fight for him, to fight him, to really to step on Ares. What Ares wants is Xena to just step on him and just make him beg for mercy. And I think that's probably around 10, 11 years old, probably my first experience with seeing BDSM and in a very Saturday afternoon, Sunday afternoon adventure show. So very dialed down, but definitely something that I was able to recognize. And then in today's society, what we have is a lot of people that are getting more into it. They've gotten into it because of certain books. I believe those books are like the Bible, for instance. They took a couple chapters out of there and they were just like, oh, this is pretty cool what some of these characters are doing. They read the Song of Solomon, for instance, and they're like, oh, Solomon's in defeat. And that kind of opens the door of like, well, what could I be into? What might I want to do? And then some people kind of look at it and think about like Jesus having a foot fetish, for instance, washing everybody's feet all the time and hanging out with presumed sex workers as well, and having a close and intimate relationship, having a lot of trust and bond with them, and putting them in the forefront of the early church. And in modern day, where people are a little bit freer to go after their sexual pursuits and like to look into it a little bit, there's always a seed. You see something and it's like, oh, that unlocks something in me. For instance, you see somebody with you see a bodybuilding competition, you're like, oh, I didn't realize people had that muscle. And then you're like, oh, do other people have that muscle? Are they doing it actively? And then you discover professional wrestling, and initially you're like, oh yeah, like you're into the storylines. It's just like everybody that reads Playboy is into the articles. And then you realize, no, I'm just here because all of these people are attractive. And simply with some of the media we are consuming as well, we have instances of like things like Brat Summer and people acting in a bratty behavior. And that all kind of ties back to Jesus in a lot of ways because Jesus was the original brat. Anytime things didn't go his way, he would go out, he would throw a hissy fit, he would stay behind with the teachers and tell them why they were wrong, they didn't understand things, destroy the money changers, all to kind of get that attention and be like, hey, I'm gonna you get people's attention and get people to act the way I want them to towards me and towards everybody else because they everybody's got a little brat in them. And if you act in that way towards other people and they are willing to act that way towards you, ultimately, I think everybody is going to be better off because you can go back to some of your more simplistic urges of like, yeah, I don't want to go to school. No, I don't want to go to work. And then it's like, oh, well, I'm going to make you go to work. And then it's like, oh, okay. And you can get a little bit of that dopamine kick, even if that's not necessarily something that you're into all the time. And you can kind of go and seek that out if that's something that you really, really want, or seek that out in your workplace with your workplace dynamics as well, whether it's where you're going to work or the type of people that you're going to try and hire at your workplace. I wouldn't necessarily recommend, depending upon how stringent your HR is, getting into a position where you're having too many people that are engaging in BDSM and sexual intercourse and in your workplace. But with the right disclosures, maybe it's totally fine. And maybe that's what everybody's into. Maybe a community where you meet up specifically for that fantasy of like everybody is gonna come in business casual or suits or whatever like that, and they can play around and they can have fun because that's the sort of thing that they want to do. But they unfortunately they've been told that that's inappropriate in their regular workplace or what have you, or whatever the circumstances are, and that people get an outlet then. And I think that that's a positive and beautiful thing. Now, based on what you've heard so far, about how much of that would you say was accurate?
I honestly, I'm gonna say maybe like somewhere between 40 and 60%.
40 and 60%. Shockingly enough, that is pretty consistent with what I with how accurate I usually am. So tell me what I'm fascinated to learn more.
Well, one thing I've heard is that Jesus is Brat. And I don't know, like part of me is like, is that a truth or is that something that like the youth pastor is using right now to try to get people more into Christianity?
Well, I've thought of it and I'm like, what? I think there's a youth pastor out there that doesn't fully understand what brat means and is like, what? Jesus is definitely brat. And like, I wouldn't be surprised if there is the black lettering on green background of a lowercase Jesus somewhere. And if there's not, there should be. That probably is going into the episode art, if I'm going to be honest.
But actually, now that I think about it, honestly, like Christianity and Jesus is so not brat. If anything, Judaism is brat because
Okay.
Judaism is like question everything, and Christianity is like no, because don't ask questions. That's just why.
I see. Yeah, that's a good that's a that makes a lot of sense, especially in like the Old Testament of yeah, I agree. Is yes.
Um, but from when you like honestly from the jump when you were like from books, from the Bible, this is where people learn it. I'm like, honestly, yeah, because what is BDSM, but trying to like make sense of all the jumbled stuff that is in our head and in our loins and in our body and play with it in a fun and manageable way. So there is a common thought that like all BDSM and things that we're into sexually comes from our trauma or our childhood trauma. And like
Hmm.
it can be that, but it can also just be like weird pervert shit. And I think specifically with Brat and with Brat Summer is about doing things that aren't societally acceptable, societally palatable, or what is expected of you. It's like doing all of the opposite of those
Hmm.
things. And Christianity, and like Jesus, and like that, any kind of upbringing that feels a bit more stringent, that creates like a really great rubric of what to like rebuke against, or like all of the fears that religion brought in. Like, if you don't do this, then all of these bad things will happen. And like, these fears are the things that shape your childhood. And within BDSM, my theory is that all of the things that we are into in a kink context are closing a loop
Okay.
somehow on our insecurities or things that bother us. And they're either validating those or invalidating those. So if you feel like you are worthless and not deserving of love, then I can either confirm in a fun, kinky way that you are worthless and not deserving of love, or I can negate that by like worshiping you. You are so worthy of love and all of the praise kink, etc.
Hmm.
And there's no really rhyme or reason of like which side, like negating or closing the loop that we fall on. But like both of those close that loop in some way that kind of just allows our brain to go smooth.
I see. Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. Like in some ways, I I mean, I don't know if this analogy is appropriate, and forgive me if it's kind of from a limited perspective, but it seems like there's an aspect of like a therapeutic dynamic to it, or like that nice bartender coming in and like affirming you, or kind of like that kind of dynamic of like, yeah, we see what's wrong here, but like we want to kind of steer this person one or two directions to get them to enjoy themselves or enjoy what they're doing more. Is that too far out?
I always get worried with the word therapeutic
Okay,
because it's not a replacement for therapy. But the other
totally.
reason I think it's not like that is when we think of therapy, it is one-sided. We pay our therapists, we don't listen to their feelings. And when it comes to kink, even if there is like a submissive or a bottom, unless you're paying that other person to be a professional and not have wants and needs, then it's it's a two-sided thing. And I think it's just more about like communicating and understanding your needs and then being able to understand with someone else of like how does that match up with what they are willing and capable of giving, because it's not like here's my list of demands, do them.
Right.
But it's like this combining of both people's brains and psyche and limitations in order to create this thing that essentially is just like, this would make me feel good. It's
Right.
like kind of as simple as like, this would feel nice for me.
Absolutely. I feel like that is very more specific than my analogy. Definitely. That feels like it's the communication aspect is so important. Have you found like let's go back actually. Like what got you first, if this is a comfortable question, what first got you most interested in this community? Was this something that you always felt drawn to or something you kind of grew into?
So, I mean, I was always a brat. I did not know it until I found the kink community
I see.
and kink in general. And like within the brat nature, so what a brat is somebody who likes to not do what they're told, refuse orders, cause chaos, etc., for a variety of reasons that could be related to a reaction for someone else, or it could be just expressing them. So because of that nature, I'm always like trying to kind of push boundaries and buttons, not necessarily of other people, but it's just like seeing what I'm capable of seeing what if, what's next, etc. So like exploring kink in that respect doesn't seem like too far of a stretch. When I
Absolutely.
when I figured that stuff out, it made like a lot of my life and my work made a lot of sense of like understanding of like, oh, when I'm not challenged and I get bored, I like stop trying. And that's
Mhm.
not just in kink, that's like everywhere. And I think like in finding the community, I mean, there's two like so there's in my career in the community, and like the career came out of like being really hurt and mistreated a lot and then wanting to help create more language and guidance for people around that. And then the community was just, I mean, the thing is you cannot do any of this without community. So it's like a
Right.
vital part in exploring and staying safe. And I think it like if anything it just shows different ways of like dismantling society is by building community and community care to regulate itself, to not trust the government, religion, all of those things. Like there's community in a lot of different places. It's not just within kink, but I think I don't know, it's like the older I get, the more necessary community feels.
Absolutely. What that reminded me of, especially going back to kind of the beginning, there is a desire for like discord. And much like Xena Warrior Princess, going through and trying to recognize the stuff that happened and the stuff, how that informs who you are, what you like, what you want to do, but also like going from town to town, righting the wrongs, doing what needs to happen, but also kind of saying F you, so to speak, to the gods that are trying to maintain the rules of what people would expect from you or expect from that community, and like creating your own community and putting out like the type of world you want to see, if that makes sense, with people being more educated, more understanding, and more open. Sorry that I keep using Xena as a
Yeah.
as an example, but I'm watching Xena again, so I'm like everything relates to Xena in some way.
I
uh
mean, kind of though, but also like I would think you'd find people that like Xena and kink is more of a circle than a Venn diagram. Like there's a lot of overlap within like Dungeons and Dragons community and kink
right.
communities.
Absolutely. I could definitely see that of like people, and it's like I feel like this might be, hopefully I don't slip into the misunderstanding again, but I feel like both kink and Dungeons and Dragons both have like a vernacular that you need to learn, a set of rules
Mhm.
that you need to learn, and like a fundamental respect that you need to have for the other people around you. So I could see how those could be like those skills could be transferable.
Yeah, and like the world building
Oh
too.
yes, yes, absolutely. The buying into it and being consistent with your character and the circumstance.
Yeah, especially because like within D&D too, you have like your character, which is like really set and defined, and there's something really like nice about that of like
Mhm.
knowing the strengths and limitations of your character. I think like honestly, there's probably stuff that the BDSM community can learn from D&D.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if there were. And like maybe it's time for a crossover event of some sort, conference of some sort, where the minds come together and see what you get a conference table discussion going where people learn from one another, or you get more of a like creative view to it. You have people that have never played D&D together, and one of them secretly is a dominatrix, and but they're not the dungeon master, and you see how that kind of develops and where that kind of goes. I think that would be something that people get a kick out of. uh,
Okay, a bunch of dominatrixes have like special made floggers that have like the D&D dice as like the
oh,
handle.
that's great. That's
Yeah.
fantastic. I
Yeah.
I love that that exists. Has anybody gone into getting like Legos on like the floggers? I feel like that would be really good. Okay,
There's Lego paddles.
Lego paddles. Okay,
Yeah.
fantastic. Good for them. Like so often our Legos just get put away into a box, they get donated. And I commend them for I see people in the world building out Legos to like patch holes and stuff like that, but I say put them on a paddle. That's fantastic. Well, this has been so informative. I really appreciate you providing this information. If people wanted to learn more about you or more about this topic, where would you recommend they go?
You can go to my website, that is lolajean.com, or courses.lolajean.com to find my courses. I also have another business called 7 Days of Domination that is more geared towards professionals, but we have over 100 different classes on every single topic you can imagine, and then the ones you probably couldn't.
Oh, fantastic. Wonderful. I really appreciate you joining me today. And this was such a delight. I feel like I learned a lot, and I hope you had a good time.
I did. Thank
Good.
you.
Good. My name is Matt Storrs, and this has been Mattsplaining. Before we go today, I want to thank Ryan Lawson, my dear friend, for making the theme music for Mattsplaining. Ryan can be reached at beatblenderstudios@gmail.com or at Beat Blender Studios on Instagram and TikTok.